Hi everyone, my name is Will Valida. I'm a software engineer and cloud architect, and in this video we're going to be talking about recipes in Redis. Recipes enable a separation of concerns between IT operators and developers by automating infrastructure deployment. Developers select the resources that they want in their application. This could be Mongo Databases, Redis Caches, Dapr State Stores, etc. And IT operators codify in their environment how these resources should be deployed and configured, whether they be lightweight containers or resources that we deploy to Azure or AWS. When a developer deploys their application and its resources, recipes automatically deploy the backing infrastructure and bind it to the developer's resources. So taking an example, here I'm building an application and in that I want to use a cache. As a developer, I can define in my Redis application that I want to use a cache, so I define that as a resource within my application. What IT operators and platform engineers will do is codify how this cache should be deployed and configured. So in this example, this cache will be deployed onto Azure. We're going to integrate it into a VNet, so we're going to need to deploy a private endpoint for it. We may also want to enable diagnostic logging for the cache as well. Essentially, when a developer deploys their application and its resources, recipes automatically deploy the backing infrastructure and bind it to the developer's resources. Let's build an application that uses a recipe to see this in action. Okay, so in this video, we're going to learn how we're going to use the dev recipes in our Redis environment to quickly run containerized infrastructure. Now, as I mentioned before, recipes enable a separation of concerns between infrastructure teams and developers by automating infrastructure deployment. So developers are going to define what they need, whether that's a Redis cache or a MongoDB, and operators will define how it will be deployed, whether that's on Azure or AWS or as containerized resources in Kubernetes. Now, this application is going to be very simple. It's going to be a very simple to-do list which stores and visualizes to-do items. It's going to consist of a front-end container and a back-end Redis cache. Now, developers don't need to specify what cloud resources they're using in their application. Instead, with recipes, they choose the portable Redis API, which can be provided by any cloud provider or as a Docker container. And then when deployed, a recipe will select what infrastructure to deploy and run. So what I'm going to do first, I've created a new directory called recipe, and I'm going to initialize a new rad environment by running rad init. I am just going to get a little bit more real estate there. I don't know what's going on there, but if I press enter, that should create a new application for me. So that's going to go ahead and initialize my new application and create my new environment. I'll just clear up the terminal a little bit here. And what I'm going to do now is run rad recipe list to view the recipes in my environment. And what we see here is a table of available recipes. Now, development environments are preloaded with these local dev recipes. And this is just a set of recipes that allow you to quickly get up and running with lightweight containerized infrastructure. In this video, what I'm going to be doing is using these local dev recipes to deploy my Redis cache as a lightweight Redis container inside my Kubernetes cluster. Now, what that rad init command has done is basically scaffolded this bicep file for me. So I'll just clear that up and get a little bit more real estate here. So this bicep file has already defined a front-end container for me. So now what I'm going to do is define the cache, and I'm going to connect it to this front-end container. So first things first, I'm going to add a parameter for my environment. And I'm going to scroll down here a little bit. On line 24, write resource cache. I'm going to create a new Redis cache. I'm going to give it a name of cache, not very inspiring. I'm going to say it's deployed to this environment with this application. And then I'm just going to go ahead and connect it to my container by defining a Redis connection using the resource ID of that cache that I've just defined. Cool. So note here that I haven't specified a particular recipe name, so it's going to be using a default recipe that's already preloaded in my environment. So if I use the name Azure or AWS, I would say I'm actually deploying this Redis cache to my Azure or AWS environments, and I'm going to do some videos in the future about how that actually works, because there's a bit of a method to actually registering recipes within your environment, and also letting Radius kind of create resources for you within Azure and AWS environments. But that's out of scope for now. So what I want to do is deploy my application. I can do that with rad deploy and pass in my bicep file. And what that's going to do is going to build my app.bicep file. It's going to deploy my template, and it's going to deploy my resources. So it's going to start off with my cache. And then once that cache has been deployed, it should start deploying my front-end application. There it goes, or my demo container. And then once that is deployed, we should see, with the power of vamping during a video, that my application has now been deployed. Now what we can do, we can actually view the Kubernetes pods to see the infrastructure container deployed by the recipe. So I'm going to run kube control get pods. Not the default namespaces, so I just run default. There we go. Had to get the right namespace. So what I'm going to do is just clear that up, run that again, and there we go. There are my two containers running. So there is my front end or my demo container, along with the Redis cache that was automatically created by the default local dev recipe. So now what I can do is I can actually port forward my container, if I can spell containers right. I'm going to port that to my localhost 3000. So there we go, there's my log stream running. So if I just navigate to localhost on a different screen, bring that into motion. So there we go. Now we can see my Redis container has been connected to my front-end application. And if I scroll up, go into the to-do list, if I add a new item, that's going to be added into my Redis cache. Now, for using local recipes, that is pretty much all there is to it. There is another trick that we can use to actually learn a little bit more about the recipes that we'd like to use. So what I'll do is I'll just stop that container, clear that up, and then using the rad CLI, I can go rad recipe, show in my default namespace the resource type. And then using this resource type, what I'll do is I'll just copy and paste this. This is the resource type that we're going to be using. If I spell type correctly, that'd be a good start. Just paste that. And then if I press enter, I should see there's a little bit more information about the template, about the recipe, that I'm going to be using. So we can see available parameters and available defaults. This isn't very descriptive, so I'm going to use another example. I'm going to use my Mongo Database's resource instead. If I press enter there we go. That's a bit more descriptive for us. So here we can see details about the recipe itself. So we can see it's a default recipe. This is the type, what kind of template it is. You can create bicep recipes and also Terraform recipes. Where it's getting the template from. So this is one of the kind of publicly available recipes that the Radius team have already provided out of the box. If you have your own custom recipes, which is a video I'm going to do in the future as well, I'll show you how you can actually deploy that to a container registry that you control. We can also see parameters here. So here I've got a parameter for my username, also my password and database. We can see what type it is. So string, password is a secure string, which is good. And we can also see some default values as well. So that's all there is to it to deploy local dev recipes. In a future video, I'll talk about how we can actually deploy or use recipes to deploy resources to Azure and AWS. But one thing we can do for cleanup is we can actually run rad environment. I just want to list all my environments. Since I don't need this anymore, I can now do a bit of a cleanup by deleting my default environment. Cool, and that's all there is to it. So that wraps up our demo. If you like this video, give it a like. If you want to see more videos like this, don't forget to subscribe. If you have any questions, please ask in the comment section below. Hope you're having a good day, and we'll see you all next time.